Hello, my dear listeners, and welcome to Sleepytimepod. I'm Abigail. Tonight, we'll dive into a fascinating Greek mythology story. So relax your body, let your eyes rest, and let's begin. The sky above the tranquil valley was awash in the colors of early dawn, the horizon gently brushed with pale hues of rose and gold. Yet for Phaethon, the beauty of the world seemed distant, shrouded by questions that swirled restlessly within him. He stood by the edge of the river, watching the soft light catch on its flowing surface, his heart heavy and uncertain. Phaethon had heard the whispers all his life. Look at his hair, like fire kissed by the dawn. Some would say, nodding toward his bright golden curls that seemed to catch the light in a way others did not. He is more than mortal. Others murmured when they thought he couldn't hear, casting glances at his mother, Clymene, as though her son were a mystery they couldn't solve. Phaethon was aware of his own difference, of the strange fire in his spirit that never seemed to quiet. Even as a boy, he had run through fields with a strength and speed others could only envy, leaping higher, running farther, his laughter wild in his throat like the call of some distant creature. But the differences alone weren't enough. He needed the truth, and he knew only one person could give it to him. Turning from the river, Phaethon headed home to the modest house where he and his mother lived. His footsteps slowed as he approached, catching sight of her at her weaving loom, her fingers gliding over the threads. She looked up as he entered, her face serene and warm, though the lines around her eyes hinted at a lifetime of worries. "Mother," Phaethon began, his voice quieter than he had intended. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "There is something I need to know." Clymene's hands paused, her gaze shifting to him, sensing the weight of his words. "What is it, my son?" "People talk," he said, his voice growing stronger. "They talk about my hair, my strength, about my fire. They say I am not like others." And sometimes he hesitated, feeling the sting of vulnerability. "Sometimes I feel it too, that I am." Clymene's eyes softened, a flicker of sadness passing through them. "Phaethon," she said, "you are my son, my beloved son. But who is my father?" Phaethon pressed, his eyes intent, refusing to let her evade the question this time. "Please, mother, I have to know." Clymene's hands folded in her lap, her expression shifting from warmth to resignation. It was clear she had expected this question eventually. "Very well," she murmured, nodding slowly. "It is time you knew." She rose from her seat, motioning for him to sit beside her. Phaethon obeyed, though he felt his pulse quicken with anticipation. She looked out through the doorway, her gaze resting on the horizon, as if remembering something distant and unreachable. "Your father," she began, her voice hushed, "is Helios, the god of the sun?" Phaethon's breath caught in his throat, his eyes widening. The name echoed in his mind, heavy with wonder and disbelief. Helios. the mighty god who drove the blazing sun chariot across the sky each day, who looked down upon the world with the eyes of eternal light. It was impossible, and yet it felt right. Helios, he whispered. My father is Helios? Clymene nodded, her voice steady. Yes, he is a god, Phaethon, and when he looked upon me with his radiant gaze, he loved me. You are the child of that love, born of a mortal and a god. But why have I never met him? Phaethon's voice grew louder, tinged with a frustration that surprised him. Why has he never come to see me, to tell me this himself? Clymene placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, her touch soft and comforting. The gods are not like us, my son. Their lives are bound to their divine roles, their powers immense and often difficult to comprehend. Helios has his duty to guide the sun across the sky. He cannot simply leave it to visit the earth, and he has no knowledge of what it means to be human. Phaethon turned away, his mind racing with conflicting emotions. Pride and anger mingled in his heart, the knowledge of his divine blood lifting him, yet the absence of his father leaving a bitter taste. I deserve to know him, he said quietly, his voice firm with newfound determination. Clymene sighed, her expression one of deep sorrow. I understand, Phaethon, but seeking the gods is a dangerous journey, one that often brings sorrow and hardship. Phaethon's gaze met hers, unwavering. Mother, I must. If I am his son, if I am part god, then I need to see him. I need him to see me, to prove that I am more than just a mortal boy. A long silence fell between them, the weight of his decision sinking in. Finally, Clymene spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Then go, my son, go to the palace of the sun and seek out Helios. But be wary of pride, for it has led many down perilous paths. Phaethon embraced her tightly, feeling her arms wrap around him with a protective love that grounded him, even as his heart surged with excitement. Pulling away, he gazed at her one last time, imprinting her face in his memory, knowing he was setting out on a journey that could change everything. Leaving his village, Phaethon set his sights on the distant mountain where his mother said the palace of the sun rested at dawn. The journey would be long and arduous, but he felt no hesitation. Each step brought him closer to his identity, closer to understanding who he was meant to be. As he traveled, he encountered villages and forests, each one filled with curious eyes that followed his passage. He walked through fields where shepherds looked up, their faces shadowed with both awe and suspicion. Rumors of his lineage had spread, and he saw it reflected in their gazes, the speculation, the whispers, the hushed awe. One evening, as he rested beside a campfire he had built in a grove of olive trees, he noticed a figure approach. A young boy, no older than 12, peered at him with wide eyes, clutching a small wooden lyre. "Are you the son of Helios?" the boy asked, his voice filled with awe. Phaethon felt a flicker of pride, a glimmer of the divine within himself. "Yes," he replied, his voice strong and sure. "I am Phaethon, son of the sun." The boy's eyes widened and he kneeled reverently. "Will you shine like him? Will you bring us warmth?" Phaethon's heart softened as he looked at the boy. He did not yet know what he could bring or what his journey would mean, but he felt the weight of expectation, the hope of those who longed for the warmth of his father's light. "I will do my best," he promised, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder. "One day, perhaps, you'll see me ride across the sky." The boy looked up at him, his face alight with wonder, and then turned, disappearing back into the shadows of the grove. Left alone, Phaethon stared into the fire, the crackling flames reflecting the ambition burning within him. After many days of travel, Phaethon at last arrived at the foot of the great mountain where the sun's palace stood. Its peak was hidden within shimmering clouds that glowed with the colors of dawn, and he could feel the warmth radiating down from above, filling him with a surge of anticipation. The climb was steep and treacherous, the mountain paths narrow and winding. The air grew hotter as he ascended, beads of sweat forming on his brow, but he pushed forward, driven by the strength of his purpose. As he neared the summit, the clouds parted, revealing the golden gates of the Palace of the Sun. They towered above him, shimmering with a brilliance that defied mortal description. The walls were adorned with sunbursts and celestial patterns, and the entire palace seemed to glow from within, as though infused with the light of 1,000 suns. Phaethon approached the gates, his heart pounding, his hand lifting to push them open. The doors swung wide effortlessly, revealing a vast hall filled with light, so radiant it nearly blinded him. And there, seated upon a golden throne at the far end of the hall, was Helios himself. The brilliance in the hall of the sun was overwhelming, illuminating every corner with a radiance that felt both foreign and familiar to Phaethon. He squinted, his eyes adjusting to the intense light as he gazed at the figure on the golden throne. Helios, the god of the sun and his father, sat surrounded by the splendor of his celestial court, the walls shimmering with the hues of dawn and dusk, swirling in a dance of perpetual twilight. Helios was a magnificent figure, his form wrapped in robes that seemed woven from the very threads of sunlight. His eyes blazed like molten gold, and his hair flowed in brilliant fiery strands that glowed even brighter than Phaethon's. It was as though he embodied the sun itself, radiating an aura that filled the entire hall with warmth and light. As Phaethon stepped forward, he felt an overwhelming sense of awe, and, for the first time in his life, a sense of belonging. Yet beneath that feeling lay a flicker of uncertainty. Would Helios recognize him? Would he acknowledge him as his son? Helios's gaze shifted toward Phaethon, and for a moment he studied the young man before him, his expression unreadable. "Who stands before me, entering the palace of the sun unannounced." Helios's voice was deep, resonant, and filled with a timeless authority that reverberated through the hall. Phaethon felt the weight of his words, as if the god's voice itself held the power of the heavens. Gathering his courage, Phaethon took a deep breath and stepped closer. Great Helios, I am Phaethon, son of Clymene. I have come seeking you, my father. Helios raised an eyebrow, a glimmer of surprise flickering in his golden eyes. For a moment, there was silence as Helios seemed to consider this young mortal standing before him, claiming to be his son. Clymene's son, Helios murmured, his voice softer, as though remembering something from a distant past. Yes, I remember her well. His gaze turned thoughtful, and then with a slight nod, he beckoned Phaethon forward. Come closer, Phaethon. Let me see you. Phaethon felt his heart pound with anticipation as he stepped toward the throne, his eyes meeting Helios's. In that moment, he could feel the warmth of the sun god's presence, a warmth that seemed to seep into his very soul, filling him with a sense of strength and purpose. Helios leaned forward, studying him intently. Yes, I see her in you, he said, his voice softening with an unspoken fondness. And there is fire in your spirit that is familiar. The light of the sun runs in your veins. Phaethon felt a surge of pride at Helios's words, a validation of the strength he had always felt within himself. I came because I needed to know, he said, his voice steady. All my life, I felt different. People would whisper about my lineage, about my fire, but I needed to hear it from you. Helios's gaze softened, and he nodded. I understand, Phaethon. Mortals often struggle to find their place, and I imagine it was not easy for you. But know this, you are my son, and I recognize you as such. A rush of emotions filled Phaethon, relief, joy, and an almost overwhelming sense of purpose. He had come searching for identity, and now he knew he was the son of the god who carried the sun across the sky, the god who lit the world each day with his golden light. Yet, even in his elation, a question lingered in Phaethon's mind, a question that had gnawed at him for as long as he could remember. Father, he began, hesitating before speaking the words aloud. Why did you never come to see me? Helios's face grew solemn, and he looked away, his gaze falling on the brilliant patterns of light dancing along the walls of the palace. I am bound to my duty, Phaethon. Each day I must drive the chariot of the sun across the sky, bringing light and life to the world. It is a task that can never be abandoned, not even for a moment. But am I not your son? Phaethon asked, his voice betraying a hint of the pain he had carried for so long. Am I not worthy of even a single visit? Helios's expression softened, and he reached out, resting a hand on Phaethon's shoulder. You are worthy, my son, more than worthy, and if I could, I would have been there. Watching you grow, guiding you as a father should. But the lives of gods and mortals are rarely simple. My role is fixed, bound to the heavens. Phaethon's eyes lowered, a mix of emotions churning within him. He understood, but the ache of his father's absence still lingered. Helios's gaze remained fixed on him, a glimmer of pride in his eyes. Yet, I see that you are strong, Phaethon. You have found your way here on your own, driven by your spirit. That, too, is my gift to you. My fire, my light. Emboldened, Phaethon looked up, his heart filled with a newfound sense of determination. Then, if I am truly your son, let me prove it. Give me a chance to show the world who I am. Helios frowned, a flicker of caution entering his gaze. And how do you intend to prove it? Phaethon hesitated, but the words came almost unbidden, the fire within him blazing with the intensity of his resolve. Let me drive the chariot of the sun, he said, his voice filled with a fierce yearning. Let me carry the light across the sky, just for one day. Helios's face darkened, his golden eyes narrowing. You do not understand what you ask, Phaethon. The chariot is not meant for mortals. Even gods have struggled to control its power. But I am not just a mortal, Phaethon countered, his voice steady and unwavering. I am your son. The fire that runs in your veins runs in mine. I can do this, Father. I know I can. Helios looked at him in silence, his expression a mixture of pride and fear. He could see the strength in Phaethon, the same fierce will that had driven him across the heavens for countless centuries. But he also saw the danger, the hubris and ambition that had led many mortals to ruin. Slowly, Helios rose from his throne, his gaze never leaving Phaethon. You are indeed my son, he said, his voice low and filled with a weight that Phaethon could not yet comprehend. And as your father, I am bound to my word. He extended his hand, gesturing toward the massive, towering doors at the far end of the hall. Come, he said, if you are so determined, then I will grant you your wish. Phaethon's heart raced as he followed his father through the halls of the palace, each step bringing him closer to the fulfillment of his dream. He could hardly believe it. On he would ride the chariot of the sun blazing across the heavens as his father did each day. He would prove to the world, to himself, that he was worthy of his divine lineage. Yet, as they approached the great stable where the chariot was kept, Helios stopped and turned to him, his face grave. Before we proceed, there is something you must understand, Phaethon, he said, his tone firm. The chariot is not a simple vehicle. It is bound to the very fabric of the sky, and controlling it requires not just strength, but balance and wisdom. The horses that draw it are wild and untamed, and the path across the heavens is fraught with dangers. Even a slight misstep can lead to disaster. Phaethon nodded, undeterred. I am ready, Father. I am prepared to face whatever challenges come my way. Helios sighed, a flicker of sadness crossing his face. If you are truly resolved, then so be it. But know this, once you take the reins, you cannot turn back. The sun's path is fixed, and it must be followed to the end. Phaethon felt a thrill of exhilaration as he stepped into the stable. There, before him, stood the chariot, a magnificent vessel of gold and fire, its frame adorned with celestial symbols that glowed with an inner light. It was both beautiful and terrifying. a testament to the power of the sun and the god who wielded it. Beside the chariot were the horses, 4 magnificent creatures with coats as black as midnight and eyes that blazed like stars. Their nostrils flared as they sensed his approach, and they stomped their hooves, filling the air with a crackling energy that made his skin prickle. "These are the steeds of the sun," Helios said, his voice reverent. "They are the only ones capable of bearing the chariot across the heavens, and they are bound to me. Just as the light is bound to the sky." Phaethon stepped forward, reaching out a hand toward one of the horses. It snorted, its fiery eyes fixed on him, and he felt the raw power that radiated from its body. A thrill of excitement coursed through him, mingled with a tinge of fear. "Remember, Phaethon," Helios said, his voice stern. "If you are to ride the chariot, you must control the horses. Do not let them veer from the path, for they are as wild as the flames they embody." Phaethon nodded, his gaze fixed on the chariot, his heart pounding with anticipation. This was his chance, his opportunity to prove his worth, to claim his place as the son of the sun. He climbed onto the chariot, his hands grasping the reins, feeling the weight of his father's legacy settle upon him. Helios stepped back, his expression a mixture of pride and sorrow. "May the light guide you, my son," he said softly. And with a shout, Phaethon urged the horses forward, the chariot lurching into motion as the steeds leaped into the sky, their hooves igniting a trail of fire that blazed across the heavens. Phaethon felt the wind rushing past him, the thrill of flight, the exhilaration of the heavens unfolding before him. He was no longer just a mortal boy. He was Phaethon, son of Helios, riding the chariot of the sun. Yet even as he ascended, a shadow of doubt flickered at the edge of his mind. The journey had only just begun. The chariot surged forward with a sudden, violent speed as Phaethon grasped the reins, his heart hammering in his chest. The horses, Aethon, Aeus, Pyroas, and Phlegon, were immense forces of nature, their eyes ablaze with the fiery brilliance of stars, their breath a burning mist that filled the air with scorching heat. Each powerful stride tore through the sky, leaving a blazing trail of light and fire in their wake. Phaethon felt the weight of the sun's chariot beneath him, a vessel forged from pure celestial gold, its sides inscribed with symbols and sigils too ancient to decipher. The power was intoxicating, the sensation of soaring across the heavens, unlike anything he had ever known. For the first time, he understood what it felt like to be a god, to look down upon the world below with all its vastness laid out like a tapestry. The horses charged forward, pulling the chariot higher and higher. Beneath him, the earth began to stir, responding to the light now pouring over its surface. Rivers glittered in the dawn, mountains caught the first glimmers of gold, and the deep seas reflected the glow of his ascent. Villages stirred, and shepherds looked up in wonder as the early morning sun brightened the sky. Yet even as he gazed out upon the waking world, a flicker of doubt crept into Phaethon's mind. His father had warned him of the chariot's dangers, the balance required to steer it safely. He tightened his grip on the reins, determined to hold his course, to keep the horses on the path that Helios himself followed each day. But as they rose higher, the horses sensed the unfamiliarity of their new driver. "Steady," Phaethon muttered, leaning forward, his voice barely a whisper in the roar of the chariot. "Hold steady." But Phaethon, the lead horse, threw back his head, whinnying with a cry that pierced the heavens. The other horses responded, their wild spirits unrestrained by the hand of Helios. They surged forward, veering slightly to the left, dragging the chariot off its usual path. The world below tilted, and Phaethon felt his stomach lurch as the chariot shuddered under the strain. "No," he cried, yanking on the reins to pull them back on course. "Steady, I command you." The horses bucked in defiance, their hooves striking sparks that fell like embers from the sky. Phaethon struggled to regain control, his grip slipping as his hands grew sweaty, his arms trembling under the force. He was strong. He had always known that, but this was a strength beyond anything he could fathom, a raw, untamed power that resisted his mortal will. Below, the earth trembled, sensing the unsteady chariot above. As the horses pulled wildly to the side, the sun veered closer to the earth, its heat intensifying as it neared the surface. Great swaths of land began to smolder under the scorching rays, rivers shriveled into dry beds, and forests sparked into flames, their trees consumed in an instant. Animals scattered in terror, and people shielded their eyes from the blinding light, their cries echoing up to the heavens. Phaethon could see the destruction below, the forests and fields aflame, the rivers boiling in their beds. Panic surged through him, mingling with a sense of helplessness he had never felt before. He had thought himself strong enough, thought that the fire within him would guide him as his father's light had guided Helios. But now he felt as fragile as any mortal, his hands slipping on the reins, the chariot lurching and jerking as the horses defied him. "Please stop," he shouted, his voice lost in the roar of the flames and the thundering hooves. "I am your master. Obey me." Yet the horses, sensing his fear, grew wilder, their manes flickering with the intensity of their celestial fire. They surged forward, pulling the chariot erratically, and Phaethon could only cling to the reins, his body thrown from side to side with each reckless movement. The heat intensified, the flames licking at his skin, searing him with a pain that was both blinding and surreal. The weight of his pride and ambition pressed on him as the very thing he had sought to prove himself was slipped further from his control. In the lands below, cities and villages began to wilt under the sun's unchecked heat. Once, fertile valleys turned to deserts, fields of crops crumbled into dust, and the great rivers that fed the lands dried up, their beds cracked and barren. In Athens, in Thebes, in all the ancient cities of Greece, people looked to the sky, their faces filled with horror and confusion, calling out in desperation to the gods. Mount Olympus itself was shaken by the cries of mortals. The gods, sensing the disturbance in the heavens, gathered to witness the unfolding catastrophe. Zeus, seated on his throne, watched the blazing chariot careening across the sky with a deepening frown, his powerful gaze filled with a mixture of anger and sorrow. Beside him, Hera shook her head, her voice a low murmur. Helios's son has overreached, just as his father warned. He is out of his depth. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, stepped forward, her expression somber. Phaethon is young and untested. He wanted to prove his worth, but he did not understand the dangers of wielding power without knowledge. Zeus remained silent, his gaze fixed on the chariot, the flames casting shadows across his face. If this continues, all of creation will suffer. I must act. Back in the chariot, Phaethon was beginning to realize the full extent of his mistake. His pride, his ambition, they had blinded him to the warnings of his father, the words of caution that now echoed in his mind like a cruel taunt. He had wanted to be a god, to ride across the sky with the power of the sun at his command, but now he was nothing more than a child grasping at flames that burned too bright and too hot to hold. Desperation overtook him, and he pulled with all his strength, trying to bring the chariot under control to steer the horses back on the proper path. But the creatures were wild, unyielding, their fiery spirits immune to his pleas. A part of him knew it was futile, yet he clung to the reins, refusing to give up, refusing to surrender to the chaos he had unleashed. "Father," he cried, his voice breaking, his pride stripped away to reveal only fear. "Help me." But Helios, bound to his palace until the appointed time, could not answer. The chariot continued to plummet toward the earth, its path a blaze of destruction that scorched everything it touched. Mountains melted, their peaks turned to rivers of molten rock. Oceans bubbled and steamed, their waters receding from the burning shores. Even the sky itself seemed to buckle under the strain, the clouds evaporating into nothingness as the sun's heat consumed them. In the heavens, Zeus raised his hand, a thunderbolt forming in his grip. The gods watched in silence, their expressions grim, knowing that this was the only way to restore balance. With a heavy heart, Zeus took aim, his gaze falling upon Phaethon, the mortal boy who had dared to reach for the power of the divine. For the sake of the world, Zeus murmured, his voice barely audible as he released the thunderbolt. The sky split open with a blinding flash of light as the thunderbolt hurtled toward the chariot, a bolt of pure divine wrath that cut through the air with the force of the heavens themselves. Phaethon saw it too late, his wide, terrified eyes reflecting the streak of lightning as it closed in upon him. There was no time to react, no chance to evade. The thunderbolt struck the chariot, and for a brief, terrible moment, the entire sky was illuminated with a light brighter than the sun itself. Phaethon felt a searing pain, a force so overwhelming it seemed to tear him apart from within. And then, in an instant, the light faded, leaving only darkness. The chariot was gone. The horses scattered back to the stables of the sun, and Phaethon fell, his body plummeting through the sky. a lone figure descending toward the earth like a fallen star. His dreams, his pride, his ambition, all had been reduced to ash, scattered across the heavens by the wrath of the gods. The world watched as he fell, a streak of light that faded slowly, sinking down toward the river Eridanus, where his body would come to rest. The earth, once blistered by his hubris, began to cool. The flames died down as the sun resumed its rightful course, guided once more by Helios's steady hand. But for Phaethon, there would be no return. His journey had ended, his fate sealed by his own unchecked ambition. As he fell, a single thought lingered in his mind, a whisper that echoed through the vast emptiness that surrounded him. I wanted to be more. The river embraced him, the cool waters washing over his broken form, carrying him gently to its depths. And in the heavens, the gods looked down in silence. The tale of Phaethon, a cautionary tale of ambition, pride, and the limits of human desire, forever etched into the stars. The river Eridanus flowed quietly, its deep, cool waters hiding the tragic secret it now held within its depths. The sky was calm once more, the heat and fire of Phaethon's reckless ride subsiding. Yet the world carried an air of mourning, as if the very earth knew of the sorrowful end that had befallen the boy who had tried to touch the sun. In the days that followed, news of Phaethon's fall spread slowly across the lands, carried in the whispers of mortals and the solemn sighs of the gods. For all his pride and ambition, Phaethon had been beloved by those who knew him best, by his family, and, most of all, by his sisters, the Heliades, who had always adored their younger brother. The Heliades were nymphs of radiant beauty, their hair gleaming golden like the sun, their laughter as light as the summer breeze. When they heard of Phaethon's fate, a profound grief settled upon them, a sorrow that seemed too deep for words. One by one, they gathered by the banks of the Eridanus, drawn to the place where he had fallen, hoping somehow to feel his presence again. Clymene, their mother, came as well, her face pale and drawn with sorrow. She moved with a slow, sorrowful grace, each step heavy with the weight of her loss. She gazed out over the river, her heart aching for the son she had loved and lost, the boy who had sought his father's light and had been consumed by it. Standing at the river's edge, the sisters wept. Their tears fell like pearls into the water, merging with the currents as though the river itself were absorbing their sorrow. They reached out to one another, holding hands, their shared grief creating an unbreakable bond that pulsed with love and loss. "Why did he have to try?" murmured Lampetia, the eldest, her voice a soft whisper in the silence. Why couldn't he be content with the life he had? Clymene's gaze remained fixed on the river, her face shadowed. He wanted to prove himself. She replied softly. He wanted to know he was worthy of his father's love. His pride was his undoing. Her words hung in the air, heavy with the truth. Yet the sisters' grief was too great to bear the weight of anger. They could only mourn the brother they had lost, the bright spirit who had brought warmth to their lives, who had laughed and played with them, his golden hair catching the sun. Day after day, the sisters returned to the river, drawn by an unbreakable thread of sorrow that bound them to Phaethon's memory. They sang to him, their voices carrying on the wind soft and haunting melodies that echoed over the water. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the sisters sat together, their hands entwined as they shared their grief. They spoke of memories, of Phaethon's laughter and his mischievous grin, of the games they had played as children, running through fields and forests under the watchful eye of their mother. "He was always so full of fire," murmured Eagle, the youngest of the sisters, "always chasing the light." "It was as if he was trying to become part of it," added Phaethusa, her voice trembling, as if the light were calling to him, drawing him closer and closer. As they spoke, the air around them seemed to shift, a strange warmth settling over the grove. The river itself seemed to shimmer, the waters reflecting the last rays of the setting sun in hues of amber and gold. The sisters shivered, sensing something beyond their understanding, a presence that felt both comforting and sorrowful. Clymene looked up, her eyes widening as she noticed the change in the grove. The trees around them seemed to glow, their branches swaying gently, as though moved by an invisible hand. "What is happening?" Lampetia whispered, her gaze following her mother's. Slowly, a transformation began to take place. As the sisters wept, their tears continued to fall, merging with the earth beneath them. A subtle shift in the ground seemed to ripple outward, the soil absorbing their sorrow, their love, their pain. Their bodies, delicate and graceful, began to meld with the earth, their skin turning the rich, dark color of bark, their hair becoming slender branches that reached skyward. "No," murmured Aegle, her voice filled with wonder and fear. She could feel the change within her, a gentle pull that was both comforting and strange, as if the earth itself were calling her home. The sisters did not struggle. They could feel that this transformation was part of something greater, a gift of the gods, a way to honor their love for their lost brother. They surrendered to it willingly, letting themselves become part of the grove, their sorrow woven into the very fabric of the earth. Their arms became branches, their fingers leaves that rustled softly in the evening breeze, their feet rooted into the ground, becoming part of the rich soil, drawing life from the earth itself. One by one, they transformed until each sister was no longer flesh and blood, but a tree, a living monument to Phaethon's memory. Clymene watched in silence, tears streaming down her face as she witnessed the transformation of her daughters. She felt both sorrow and peace, knowing that they had found a way to remain with their brother, to honor him in a way that was eternal and unbreakable. The trees, once her daughters, stood by the riverbank, their branches swaying gently, their leaves whispering in the wind. They would remain there forever, their roots entwined with the earth, their presence a reminder of Phaethon's tragic journey, a testament to the love that had bound them together. The gods, moved by their devotion, granted the sisters a final gift. From their branches, small golden droplets began to form, gathering like dew on the leaves before falling softly to the ground. These droplets, glowing with a warm amber light, were the sisters' tears transformed, a gift to the earth, a reminder of their love and sorrow. As the droplets hardened, they became amber, precious and beautiful, each piece holding the memory of the Heliades' grief and the fiery spirit of their lost brother. Mortals who came to the grove would find these small gems scattered beneath the trees, a gift from the sisters who had once been nymphs, now bound to the earth in eternal remembrance. And so, the tale of Phaethon and his sisters became legend. The trees by the river Eridanus stood as silent witnesses to his story, their branches stretching toward the heavens as if reaching for the sun that Phaethon had once dared to touch. In time, the grove became a place of pilgrimage, a site where mortals would come to pay homage to the boy who had flown too close to the sun and to the sisters who had loved him so dearly. They would kneel by the trees, gathering the small pieces of amber that lay scattered among the roots, cherishing each one as a token of the Heliades' love and loss. As the seasons changed, the trees blossomed and shed their leaves, yet their beauty remained constant, a testament to the enduring power of love and the resilience of those who grieve. Mortals would tell their children the story of Phaethon, of his journey, his ambition, and his fall, warning them of the dangers of pride and the need for wisdom. Yet they also spoke of the Heliades, of the strength it took to mourn, to love, to let go. And in each tale, in each whispered word, the memory of Phaethon and his sisters lived on, their story carried forward like a gentle breeze, a reminder that even in loss there is beauty, even in sorrow there is transformation. And so, the grove by the river Eridanus became a place of quiet reflection, a sanctuary where the memory of the sun god's son and his devoted sisters would remain forever, intertwined with the earth, their love eternal, their story immortal. The world above had quieted, the heat of Phaethon's sun. Chariot journey long faded, leaving the earth to recover in peace. Yet far below the fields and forests of the mortal realm, Phaethon's spirit stirred restlessly in the dim, shadowed depths of the underworld. He drifted in a gray mist that wrapped around him like a shroud, weightless yet heavy, filled with silence so profound it seemed to press upon his very soul. Here in the land of Hades, time held no meaning. Days and nights merged into a perpetual twilight, and his sense of self, once so bold and certain, had become fragile, fragmented. Phaethon looked around, his eyes adjusting to the gloom, the contours of the underworld gradually coming into view. Pale, ghostly forms drifted nearby, spirits of the dead lost in their eternal rest or contemplation, their faces expressionless, their eyes reflecting the weariness of lives long past. He was not alone here, yet he had never felt more alone. The weight of his actions lingered with him, sharp and unrelenting. His hands that had once grasped the reins of the sun chariot with pride and ambition, now felt empty, useless. His mind, which had burned with the desire to prove himself, was haunted by the memory of his hubris, by the destruction he had wrought in the world above. I wanted to be a god, he thought, bitterness creeping into his heart. I wanted to shine like my father, to be seen, to be known. But his desire to prove himself had led only to ruin. He had scorched the earth, dried rivers, and brought suffering to those who had lived peacefully under his father's light, and in the end he had fallen. Struck down by Zeus's wrath, cast into the very place he had sought to rise above. As he wandered, lost in thought, he sensed a figure approaching, a shadow moving through the mist. Turning, he saw a tall, pale woman cloaked in robes as dark as midnight, her face shrouded, but her presence unmistakable. Persephone, queen of the underworld, moved with an ethereal grace, her eyes gleaming with a strange light, both compassionate and commanding. "Phaethon, son of Helios," she said, her voice like the whisper of wind through a winter's forest. "Why do you linger here, your soul so troubled?" Phaethon lowered his gaze, feeling the weight of her words like a gentle but unyielding pressure. "I have regrets, my queen," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "I sought greatness, but I caused only pain. I failed everyone, my mother, my sisters, my father." Persephone's gaze remained fixed on him, her expression unreadable, yet a softness seemed to flicker in her eyes. "Regret is a common companion in this realm," she replied, "but your heart bears it heavily. Tell me, Phaethon, what is it that you truly seek?" He hesitated, searching within himself. His pride, once so potent, had faded, leaving behind a hollow ache. But beneath that emptiness lay something deeper, a yearning for understanding, for forgiveness, for the chance to learn from his mistakes. "I sought to be seen," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I wanted to prove myself worthy of my father's love. But now I see only the harm I have caused. I wish to make amends, but how can I, when my actions are beyond repair?" Persephone stepped closer, her gaze softening. "We cannot undo the past, Phaethon," she said gently, "but we can learn from it. We can carry its lessons with us, and in doing so, find redemption." "But how?" Phaethon's voice trembled. "How can I redeem myself when I am nothing but a shadow here, a mere echo of what I once was?" Persephone regarded him thoughtfully. "Come with me," she said, her voice both command and invitation. She turned, gliding through the mist, and Phaethon followed, compelled by her presence, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. They walked through the silent, shadowed halls of the underworld, where spirits drifted like leaves on a darkened stream. Eventually, they reached a grove of trees, their twisted branches heavy with pomegranate fruit that glowed faintly in the dim light. Persephone paused, her gaze resting on a small cluster of souls gathered beneath the branches. "These souls are like you," she said, her voice soft yet unyielding. They too sought more than what was given to them. Their desires led them to ruin, to pain, and yet they have found peace here in acceptance. Phaethon watched the spirits, noting the calm in their expressions, the stillness that seemed to settle over them like a blanket of quiet understanding. There was no bitterness in their faces, no anger or regret, only a kind of quiet surrender, a peace that Phaethon could not yet understand. "Is that what I am meant to find here?" he asked, turning to Persephone. "Peace and acceptance." "Perhaps," Persephone replied, her eyes piercing. "But acceptance is not simply resignation, Phaethon. It is the wisdom to see beyond yourself, to understand the world not only through your own desires, but through the needs of others." Phaethon felt her words settle over him, a strange warmth spreading through his chest. For so long, he had seen only his own ambitions, his own yearning to be recognized. But now, in the quiet of the underworld, he began to see how narrow that view had been. "I wanted to be more," he murmured, almost to himself, "but I never thought about what that would mean for others. I never thought of the cost." Persephone nodded, her gaze filled with a quiet approval. To truly become more Phaethon, one must learn to give of oneself, to become a light not for oneself alone, but for those around you. That is the lesson of the sun, the wisdom your father carries each day. Phaethon's heart ached with the weight of her words, and for the first time he felt a glimmer of understanding, a faint hope that perhaps in this place of shadows he could still learn to be more. Not through ambition, but through humility and compassion. "Thank you, my queen," he said, bowing his head in gratitude. "I will carry your words with me as best as I can." Persephone's expression softened, a faint smile gracing her lips. In time, Phaethon, all souls find their place. Be patient and allow yourself to grow, even here in the dark, and perhaps one day you will find peace. With that, she turned and disappeared into the mist, leaving Phaethon alone in the quiet grove. He looked up at the pomegranate trees, their fruits glowing faintly, their branches a symbol of life and transformation, even in the depths of the underworld. He felt the weight of his regrets lift, if only slightly, as though Persephone's words had opened a small window within his heart, allowing light to filter in. He knelt beside the roots of the trees, his hands resting on the cool earth, and he closed his eyes, letting himself breathe in the silence, the stillness. Here, in this place beyond the reach of the sun, he began to understand that perhaps he could grow, even as a shadow, even as a shadow, even as a spirit. As he knelt there, a strange sensation came over him, a warmth, faint yet unmistakable, blossoming in his chest. It was not the fire of ambition, nor the fierce heat of pride, but something gentler, more enduring, the beginnings of acceptance, of peace. In the quiet, he whispered a promise, a vow to himself and to the world he had harmed. "I will become more," he murmured, not for myself, but for others." The words lingered in the air, a soft echo that seemed to settle over the grove, merging with the shadows and the faint glow of the pomegranate fruits. And as Phaethon rose, he felt a newfound purpose within him, a sense that even here, in the land of shadows, he could learn to shine, not with the blinding fire of his former pride, but with a quiet, gentle light that could illuminate even the darkest corners of his heart. In the land above, the world carried on, its seasons turning, its fields blooming, its rivers flowing once more. And though mortals would continue to tell the tragic tale of Phaethon, son of Helios, the boy who had reached too far, they would also remember his sisters, the trees by the riverbank, the amber droplets that bore the memory of love and loss. For Phaethon, his journey was far from over. In the underworld, beneath the watchful eyes of Persephone and the quiet strength of the pomegranate grove, he began a new path. A path of reflection, of growth, of redemption. And in the world above, the sun continued to rise each day, its light, a reminder that even in the face of darkness, there was always the possibility of transformation. Days, or perhaps years, it was impossible to tell in the timeless haze of the underworld, had passed since Phaethon's encounter with Persephone. Her words lingered with him, a constant reminder of the path he had vowed to follow. He had promised to grow, to learn from his mistakes, to seek a light within himself that could guide him even in these shadowed realms. Yet growth, he was learning, did not come easily. Redemption was not a single moment, but a journey as winding and endless as the rivers that wound through the underworld. So Phaethon wandered. The landscape of the underworld shifted as he traveled. Sometimes he found himself in dark caverns filled with the murmurs of lost souls. Other times he walked along the banks of rivers shrouded in mist, their dark waters carrying faint whispers that seemed to echo his own regrets. One day, as he walked along the banks of the river Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, he noticed a lone figure seated on the shore, a woman shrouded in a pale, shimmering veil that obscured her face. She was humming softly, a melody that was hauntingly beautiful, filled with both sorrow and hope. The sound drew Phaethon closer, its gentle strains pulling at something deep within him. He approached slowly, his steps careful, and as he drew near, she looked up, her eyes meeting his. Beneath her veil, her face was beautiful but marked by a sadness that seemed ancient, as if her soul had carried it for countless lifetimes. "Hello," he said softly, sensing that she too was a wanderer, lost in her own thoughts. "I am Phaethon." The woman inclined her head, her gaze steady. "I know of you, son of Helios," she replied, her voice like the soft sigh of a breeze. "The tale of your fall is spoken of even here." Phaethon nodded, unashamed. "And who are you?" he asked, curious about this figure who seemed both ethereal and grounded, a soul as anchored to her grief as he was to his. "I am Alcyone," she replied, a faint smile ghosting over her lips. "Once, in life, I was a queen. My husband, Syx, was lost to the sea, and in my grief, I threw myself from the cliffs to join him." Phaethon felt a pang of empathy for her loss, her sorrow so palpable it seemed to merge with the mist around them. "And yet you are here?" he said softly. "Do you regret it?" She was silent for a long moment, her gaze resting on the dark waters of Lethe. "Regret is a strange thing," she murmured. "In the mortal world, I would have said yes, that I regretted my choices, that I wished for a different path. But here, in this place beyond time, regret has softened, its edges worn down by the patience of eternity." Her words resonated deeply within Phaethon. He too had carried regret like a wound, a sharp and bitter reminder of his failure. But her words suggested another way, a way to hold sorrow without letting it consume him. "So you have found peace?" he asked, his voice tinged with a hope he did not fully understand. Alcyone tilted her head, considering his question. "Peace is elusive," she replied, her gaze distant, "but I have found acceptance. In my grief, I became something else, something that can still sing, even in sorrow." Her words struck a chord within Phaethon, stirring memories of his own journey, the burning chariot, the pride that had driven him, the fall that had broken him. He realized for the first time that he did not have to erase his mistakes to find peace. He could hold them, learn from them, and in time, perhaps, transform them. Alcyone's gaze softened as she looked at him. "Do not let your regret consume you. Phaethon, you are young, and even here there is time to grow, to become more than your mistakes." Phaethon nodded, gratitude warming him. "Thank you, Alcyone. Your words are a gift more precious than you know." She inclined her head, a faint smile gracing her lips. "We all carry gifts in the underworld, Phaethon. It is our task to share them, to let them ripple through the shadows like light on water." With a final glance, Alcyone turned, her form fading into the mist, leaving Phaethon alone once more. But he felt lighter, as if her words had unlocked something within him, a hidden space where he could hold his sorrow without letting it define him. As he continued his journey, Phaethon met other souls, each carrying their own stories, their own burdens. He encountered Sisyphus, eternally pushing his boulder up a hill, his muscles straining as he struggled with each step. Phaethon watched, captivated by the sheer perseverance of the man who, though condemned, never surrendered. One day, as Sisyphus paused to catch his breath, Phaethon approached him, his curiosity outweighing his hesitation. "Sisyphus," he called, his voice respectful, "why do you keep pushing the boulder? You know it will only roll back down." Sisyphus looked at him, his gaze weary but unbroken. "Because I must," he replied simply. "This is my punishment, my task, and though it may seem pointless, there is a strength in enduring, a resilience that cannot be taken away. Phaethon felt a surge of understanding, a glimpse of the lesson woven into Sisyphus's struggle. Strength did not lie only in power or ambition. It lay in persistence, in the courage to face each day, each task, even when hope seemed faint. "Thank you," Phaethon said, bowing his head in respect. "You have taught me much." Sisyphus grunted, his expression softening slightly. "Remember, Phaethon, sometimes the journey itself is the lesson." With that, he turned back to his boulder, placing his hands against its rough surface, his muscles straining as he resumed his ascent. Phaethon watched him for a moment longer, admiration filling his heart. In Sisyphus's endless task, he saw a mirror of his own struggle, a reminder that his journey toward redemption would require patience, endurance, and resilience. Later, Phaethon found himself in a quiet glade, a rare patch of softness in the otherwise shadowed realm of Hades. There he encountered Orpheus, the legendary musician who sat with his lyre cradled in his hands, his fingers moving gently over the strings as he played a haunting melody. Orpheus looked up as Phaethon approached, a faint smile touching his lips. "Ah, another lost soul," he murmured, his voice like a quiet song. Phaethon inclined his head, sitting beside him on the cool, dark earth. "I know of you, Orpheus. Your song is spoken of even in the mortal world." Orpheus nodded, his expression distant. "Music is a language that transcends realms. It carries our hearts, our souls, to places beyond what words can reach." Phaethon listened, captivated by the beauty of Orpheus's music, a melody that seemed to flow from the depths of his soul, each note laced with both joy and sorrow. "Why do you play here in the underworld?" Phaethon asked, his voice barely a whisper. Orpheus sighed, his gaze resting on the strings of his lyre. "I play for those who linger, who need to be reminded that beauty still exists, even in the darkest places." Phaethon felt a pang of sorrow, a yearning to create something beautiful, something that could heal rather than harm. He had spent his life reaching for power, for the light of his father, but now he realized that true greatness lay not in dominion, but in compassion, in the willingness to bring light to others. "Thank you, Orpheus," he said softly, his voice filled with a newfound humility. "Your music has given me hope." Orpheus inclined his head, his expression gentle. "Remember, Phaethon, that even in the shadows, you can be a light. Sometimes all it takes is a single note, a single act of kindness to change the course of a soul." As Orpheus continued to play, Phaethon closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him, filling him with a sense of peace he had not known in life. Here, in the underworld, he was learning that strength was not the absence of sorrow, but the courage to carry it, to let it soften him, to make him more compassionate. In the days that followed, Phaethon carried the lessons of Alcyone, Sisyphus, and Orpheus within him, their words a tapestry of wisdom that guided him on his journey. He walked with a lighter heart, his steps filled with purpose, his soul strengthened by the resilience, acceptance, and kindness he had encountered. Though he was still a wanderer, he was no longer lost. He had found his place in the underworld, a path that did not require grandeur or power, but only the quiet courage to endure, to learn, to transform. And as he walked, he felt a faint warmth within him, a light that grew with each step, illuminating the shadows, not with the blinding fire of ambition, but with the gentle glow of understanding and humility. In this way, Phaethon began to find peace, his journey in the underworld a journey not of punishment, but of growth, a reminder that even in the darkest places, there was always a light waiting to be kindled. Phaethon continued his journey, his heart a little lighter with each step as he carried the lessons of the souls he had encountered, Alcyone, Sisyphus, Orpheus, each one a piece of his transformation. He knew now that his path was one of humility, of quiet resilience, yet he felt there was still one step remaining, one final act that would close the wound he had carried since his fall. He needed to see his father, Helios, to face him not as a son seeking validation, but as a humbled spirit seeking understanding. He had been proud, reckless, driven by his need to be seen, and it had led him to ruin. Now he longed only for peace, a peace he could not find without confronting the figure whose light he had once sought to possess. Guided by an unspoken resolve, Phaethon approached Persephone once more, finding her in a grove where shadows and light played in delicate patterns on the ground. She looked up as he approached, a faint smile gracing her lips, as though she had sensed his arrival before he even stepped into the grove. "Phaethon," she greeted him, her voice a soothing balm. "Your journey has changed you. I can see the light of understanding within you now." Phaethon bowed his head respectfully. "It was your guidance, my queen, and the kindness of others that allowed me to see what I could not before. But I feel there is one task yet unfinished. I must speak with my father. I need to face him, to understand my place beside his light." Persephone regarded him thoughtfully, her gaze warm and knowing. "Are you certain this is the path you wish to take? The road to the gods is steep, and the ascent may test you in ways you cannot yet foresee." "I am ready," Phaethon replied, his voice steady. "I know now that I cannot find peace without this. I do not seek his favor or even his forgiveness. I only seek to understand, to learn from him, to become worthy of the light he carries." Persephone nodded, her expression solemn. "Then go, Phaethon. The path is yours to take. May the wisdom you have gained be your guide." With her blessing, Phaethon set off, the shadowed landscape of the underworld receding as he climbed, moving toward the brighter realms where the gods dwelled. The ascent was arduous, each step a test of his strength, as if the underworld itself were reluctant to release him from its depths. Yet he felt the fire of purpose within him, a flame tempered by humility, a light that grew stronger as he climbed. At last he emerged from the shadows, finding himself standing on a vast open plain under a sky filled with ethereal light. Before him, rising like a sunlit palace, stood the hall of Helios, gleaming with a golden radiance that seemed to pulse with life. Phaethon felt his heart race as he gazed upon the hall, the sight filling him with a strange mix of awe and trepidation. As he stepped forward, the great doors opened with a quiet, welcoming hush, and Phaethon entered the hall, his footsteps reverberating in the silence. The walls glowed with a warm light, casting intricate patterns that danced across the floor, a reminder of the beauty and power that Helios wielded with such ease. At the far end of the hall sat Helios, his figure as radiant and commanding as Phaethon remembered. Yet this time, Phaethon did not feel the same yearning, the desperate need to prove himself. Instead, he felt a deep respect, a reverence for the father whose role he had once sought to claim. Helios looked up as Phaethon approached, his golden eyes meeting his son's with a calm intensity that revealed both strength and wisdom. Phaethon paused, bowing his head in humility, his voice soft. "Father, I have come not as your son seeking favor, but as a spirit seeking understanding. I have learned much in the underworld, and I wish to learn from you now, if you will allow it." For a moment, Helios was silent, his gaze unyielding as he studied Phaethon. Then, with a slight nod, he gestured for Phaethon to come closer. "You have changed." "Phaethon," Helios said, his voice deep and resonant. "The fire of pride that once consumed you has been tempered. Tell me, what has brought you here?" Phaethon took a steadying breath, his gaze meeting his father's. "I sought to become more than I was," he began. "I wanted to be seen, to shine as you do, but in my pursuit, I was blinded by my own ambition. I see now that I was not ready, that I did not understand the weight of the light I tried to carry." Helios listened in silence, his expression unreadable, but his eyes held a glimmer of understanding. Phaethon continued, his voice trembling with emotion. "I am not here to ask for forgiveness. I know that my actions brought suffering to the world, that I failed you and failed myself. But I have learned that the forgiveness must come from within. I only seek to understand how you bear the weight of the sun, how you carry the light each day without faltering." Helios's gaze softened, and for the first time, Phaethon saw a hint of warmth, of fatherly pride mingled with sorrow. "The light of the sun is not an easy burden to carry," Helios replied, his voice contemplative. "It is a duty, Phaethon, a commitment to bring warmth and life to the world, to serve not oneself but others. Each day, as I guide the chariot, I feel the weight of that responsibility, the knowledge that my actions touch every living being below." Phaethon listened intently, his heart swelling with a newfound respect for his father's role. He had once seen it as a position of power, of glory, but now he understood that it was a calling, a sacred duty that required strength, humility, and a deep sense of purpose. Helios continued, his voice gentle. When you took the reins, you sought to prove yourself, to claim the light as your own. But light, Phaethon, is not something that can be possessed. It is something that must be shared, nurtured, given freely. That is the lesson of the sun. Phaethon felt his chest tighten with emotion, his heart filled with both regret and gratitude. I see that now, he murmured, his voice filled with reverence. I see that I was never meant to take the light for myself. I was meant to learn from it, to grow, to carry it within me as a guide, not as a crown. Helios nodded, his expression thoughtful. And now, my son, you have learned that lesson. You have faced your own shadows, your own pride, and emerged with a heart that seeks to give rather than to take. Phaethon looked up, meeting his father's gaze with a newfound clarity. Then, if you will allow it, I wish to serve you, not as one who claims your light, but as one who honors it. I wish to carry this light within myself, to let it guide me, even here in the shadows. Helios smiled, a warmth in his gaze that was both fatherly and divine. You do honor me, Phaethon, more than you know. And though you dwell in the underworld, your journey is not bound by shadow alone. Light can reach even the darkest places, if one has the courage to carry it within. With those words, Helios reached out, placing a hand on Phaethon's shoulder. A gentle warmth spread through Phaethon's chest, a light that filled him with a sense of peace, of unity. He felt as though he were no longer separate from his father's light, but a part of it, a single flame in a vast and infinite fire. Go now, Phaethon, Helios said, his voice a benediction. Carry this light, not as a burden, but as a gift. Let it guide you, let it shape you, and may it bring peace to those you meet. Phaethon bowed his head, his heart filled with gratitude, with humility. He had sought his father's light and found it not in power, but in understanding, in the quiet strength that came from serving others. He felt whole, his spirit healed, his path clear. As he left the hall of Helios, he felt the warmth of his father's presence lingering within him, a beacon that would guide him as he returned to the underworld, to the shadows that had once felt cold and empty, but now seemed infused with possibility. He knew now that his journey was not over, that his life, even in the realm of spirits, was filled with purpose. He would become a light, not in the heavens, but in the hearts of those who lingered in darkness, a reminder that redemption was always within reach, that even the brightest fires could emerge from the deepest shadows. With a heart transformed, Phaethon descended once more, carrying within him the quiet, steady glow of understanding. A light that was his own, born not of ambition, but of compassion, of humility, of love. And so, Phaethon became a wanderer in the underworld, a gentle guide for lost souls, his presence a soft glow in the darkness, a reminder that even in the depths light could be found, for he had learned the true nature of the sun's gift, not to conquer, but to illuminate, to warm, to guide. And in that gentle, humble light, Phaethon had finally found his place. With his father's warmth still lingering within him, Phaethon walked back into the familiar shadows of the underworld, but this time he felt different. The same dark paths that had once filled him with dread now held a kind of beauty, a soft, quiet place that accepted sorrow and regret, that embraced loss and transformation. Phaethon understood now that the underworld was not a place of punishment, but of reflection, a realm where souls found the time and space to come to terms with the lives they had lived. As he walked, he felt the glow of his father's light within him, a steady warmth that guided him, not as a fire that burned fiercely, but as a gentle ember that could warm others. He let it fill his heart, transforming his purpose, giving him the strength to reach out to those who lingered in darkness. One evening, as he wandered near the shores of the river Acheron, the river of sorrow, he noticed a figure seated by the water's edge, his head bowed, his shoulders slumped with the weight of grief. The man's form was faint and translucent, as though he had long been caught in a cycle of regret, unable to move forward. Phaethon approached slowly, sensing the man's sorrow like a tangible weight in the air. He knelt beside him, his voice soft, offering not interruption but gentle companionship. "Hello, friend," Phaethon said, his tone warm and inviting. "I am Phaethon. May I sit with you?" The man looked up, his face lined with sorrow and regret, his eyes filled with a darkness that seemed to have settled there long ago. "Do as you will," he murmured, his voice weary as though it had been worn down by centuries of pain. Phaethon took a seat beside him, allowing silence to settle between them, knowing that sometimes words were not what the heart needed. He let the light within him shine softly, a warmth that reached out to the man, filling the space with a gentle peace. After a long pause, the man spoke, his voice trembling. "I am Tantalus," he said, his gaze fixed on the dark waters of the river. "Once I was a king, blessed by the gods, given everything I could desire, but betrayed their trust. I thought only of my own hunger, my own ambition, and in my pride I broke the sacred bond between mortal and divine." Phaethon listened, his heart aching for the sorrow that filled Tantalus's voice. He knew all too well the weight of pride, the blinding desire that could lead one to ruin. "I was condemned," Tantalus continued, his voice barely a whisper, "condemned to hunger and thirst for eternity, to reach for food and drink that would always slip from my grasp, a punishment as endless as my regret." Phaethon placed a hand on Tantalus's shoulder, a gesture of quiet empathy. "I too was driven by pride," he said gently. "I sought my father's light, thinking it would make me whole, make me powerful. But I did not understand the weight of the light I reached for. I, too, was brought low by my own ambition." Tantalus looked at him, his eyes filled with a flicker of understanding, a glimmer of connection that cut through the darkness of his despair. "Then you know the pain," Tantalus murmured, his voice tinged with bitterness. "You know what it means to grasp for greatness and find only emptiness." "Yes," Phaethon replied, his voice soft, "but I have also learned that our worth is not measured by our failures. We are more than our mistakes, Tantalus. We are the light we carry, the compassion we offer, the understanding we gain." Tantalus looked away, his gaze distant, as though he were trying to hold on to Phaethon's words, to let them reach the wounded parts of his heart. Silence settled over them once more, and Phaethon did not press, allowing Tantalus the time to absorb the gentle warmth of companionship. Finally, Tantalus sighed, his voice softer, more vulnerable. "Do you believe that even those of us who have fallen so far can find peace?" Phaethon nodded, his hand resting on Tantalus's shoulder in a gesture of quiet strength. "I believe that peace is not a destination, but a journey, one that we can walk even here in the shadows. You do not have to be alone, Tantalus. I will walk with you, as will others who understand your sorrow." Tantalus's expression softened, a faint glimmer of hope flickering in his eyes, a fragile light that Phaethon knew was precious. With a final nod of gratitude, Tantalus rose, his spirit lighter, his sorrow a little less heavy as he continued his journey, knowing now that he was not alone. As Phaethon continued his path, he met others like Tantalus, souls weighed down by sorrow, regret, and the memories of mistakes that had defined their lives. Each one carried their own burdens, their own stories of pride, ambition, and loss. And to each, Phaethon offered a quiet companionship, a light that could help them bear the darkness. One day, he encountered a young woman with a face etched in sorrow, her eyes shadowed with a grief so profound it seemed to radiate from her very soul. She sat beside the river Cocytus, the river of lamentation, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as though holding onto some invisible weight. Phaethon approached her with the same gentle presence, his voice soft and warm. "I am Phaethon," he said, offering his hand. "May I sit with you?" The woman looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and sadness, as though she had been alone for so long that the presence of another soul felt like both a comfort and a threat. She nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "I am Niobe," she said, her voice trembling. "Once I had children, so many children. They were my joy, my pride, but I too was proud. I boasted of them before the gods, and in my pride I invited their wrath. My children were taken from me, each one, until I was left with nothing but my grief." Phaethon felt a surge of compassion, his heart aching for her loss. He knew what it was to lose, to fall, to be left only with the weight of one's mistakes. He reached out, taking her hand in his, letting his warmth flow into her, offering her the solace of his understanding. "You loved deeply," he said gently, his voice filled with reverence. "Love, even when it brings sorrow, is a gift. Your love lives on, Niobe, in the tears you shed, in the memory of those you held dear. Niobe looked at him, her expression softening as his words reached her heart, soothing the wound that had remained raw and open for so long. Do you think that one day I might see them again? Phaethon nodded, his gaze steady. I believe that love is eternal, that it binds us even in death. Your love for your children lives on, and perhaps one day you will find them, even in the darkest places. A faint smile touched her lips, her grip on his hand loosening as though she had found a measure of peace, a quiet acceptance of the love she carried and the sorrow that had marked her. She rose, her steps lighter as she walked away, her spirit a little less burdened, her heart a little more open to hope. With each encounter, Phaethon felt his own soul grow, his understanding deepening as he offered solace to others. He realized that his role was not to carry their burdens, but to share the light he had found within himself, to be a source of quiet strength and compassion. He was no longer the boy who had sought to reach the sun, to claim its power as his own. He was now a gentle flame, a light that shone in the shadows, offering warmth to those who had been lost in darkness. As he continued his journey, he felt the presence of his father's light within him, a gift that had transformed him, a reminder that he too could be a source of healing, of redemption. And so, Phaethon became a guide in the underworld, his presence a quiet beacon for those who wandered the dark paths. Souls would come to him, drawn by the gentle glow of his spirit, by the warmth he offered without expectation, without pride. He became known as the Light-Bearer, a soul who had once reached for the sun and fallen, but who had risen again, not as a god, but as a friend to the lost, a guide for the sorrowful. In the land above, mortals would tell stories of Phaethon, the boy who had dared to drive the chariot of the sun and had paid the price. But those who listened closely would hear another story. The story of Phaethon, the light in the shadows, a soul who had found redemption not in power, but in kindness, who had become a quiet, steady flame that guided others through the darkness. And in the heart of the underworld, in the realm of shadows, Phaethon's light would continue to shine, a reminder that even the brightest light can emerge from the darkest depths, a testament to the power of humility, compassion, and love. Phaethon's presence had become a quiet beacon in the shadowed realms of the underworld. Word of the Light-Bearer spread among the souls who wandered there, drawing those in need of solace, of hope to his side. He welcomed each one with kindness, his light, a steady flame growing brighter with each soul he comforted, each sorrow he helped to soothe. One evening, as he sat near a grove of asphodel flowers, pale and ghostly in the dim light, a faint cry reached his ears, barely more than a whisper carried by the wind. The voice was soft but filled with despair, as though its bearer had lingered for an eternity in a grief too deep to be named. Phaethon rose, letting the light within him guide his steps as he moved toward the sound. The air grew colder, heavier, the shadows thickening as he neared a desolate corner of the underworld where few souls wandered. Here, the silence was deeper, the sorrow more profound, as though the very earth bore witness to a grief that had settled into the bones of the land. There, near the base of a twisted ancient tree, he found the source of the cry, a young woman, her form faint and translucent, as though her very essence had begun to fade. Her head was bowed, her hands covering her face, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Phaethon knelt beside her, his voice soft and gentle, a balm to her wounded spirit. I am Phaethon, a wanderer in this realm. May I sit with you and share whatever sorrow weighs upon your heart. The woman lifted her head slowly, her eyes hollow and haunted, her gaze filled with a sadness so deep it seemed to pierce through to his very soul. Her voice, when she spoke, was a whisper, fragile and trembling. My name is Ianthe, she murmured, her voice barely more than a breath. Once I was loved. Once I knew joy, but I lost everything, and now I am but a shadow, a memory clinging to the pain that remains. Phaethon felt his heart ache for her, the sorrow in her voice resonating with a familiar pain. He knew what it was to lose, to fall, to carry the weight of regret. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, letting his warmth flow into her, offering her a quiet strength. Tell me your story, Ianthe, he said softly. Sometimes speaking our pain aloud can help lighten its weight. Ianthe looked away, her gaze distant, as though reaching back through the corridors of time. Once in life, I was a poet, she began, her voice filled with a faint, flickering light. My words were my gift, a way to give voice to the beauty and sorrow of the world. I was loved, cherished, but could not see the blessings I held. I wanted more, always more, and in my pride I pushed away those who loved me. Her voice broke and she fell silent, her hands trembling as she held them to her chest, clutching at a sorrow too deep for words. Phaethon squeezed her shoulder gently, his own heart aching with empathy. I understand, he said, his voice a quiet confession. I too reached for more than I could hold. I too hurt those who cared for me. But I have learned that we are not defined by our mistakes, Ianthe. We are defined by the love we carry, the kindness we offer, the compassion we show, even here in the depths of shadow. Ianthe looked at him, her eyes filled with a glimmer of hope, a fragile light that seemed to take root in the depths of her sorrow. Do you truly believe that we can find peace, even after all we have lost? Phaethon nodded, his gaze steady, filled with the warmth and wisdom he had gained. Yes, I believe that peace is something we carry within us. It is not bound by the mistakes we have made, nor by the darkness that surrounds us. It is a light that can grow, even in the darkest places. A tear slipped down Ianthe's cheek, her shoulders relaxing as though a burden she had carried for eternity had finally begun to lift. She closed her eyes, taking a slow, deep breath, letting Phaethon's words settle into her heart. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "For the first time, I feel that I am not alone." Phaethon smiled, his own heart lifted by her acceptance, her willingness to embrace the light he offered. "You are never alone, Ianthe. In this place, we are all bound by our shared struggles, our shared hopes, and together we can find a path forward, even in the shadows." Ianthe rose, her form a little brighter, a little more whole. As she walked away, her steps lightened by the hope she carried. Phaethon watched her go, his heart filled with a quiet joy, a sense of purpose that grew stronger with each soul he comforted. Days, or perhaps years, passed in the timeless expanse of the underworld, each moment blending into the next as Phaethon continued his journey. He met souls of all kinds, warriors burdened by regret, lovers haunted by loss, dreamers who had lost their way, and to each he offered the light he carried, a gentle flame that could ease their sorrows, help them find peace. One day, as he wandered near the banks of the river Styx, he encountered a figure standing alone by the water's edge, his gaze fixed on the dark, swirling currents. The man's form was faint, his face etched with sorrow, his shoulders heavy with an invisible weight. Phaethon approached, sensing a depth of despair in the man that went beyond anything he had encountered before. He felt a tug of empathy, a desire to reach out, to offer solace. "Hello, friend," Phaethon said, his voice warm and inviting. "I am Phaethon. May I sit with you?" The man looked up slowly, his eyes hollow, his expression filled with a despair so profound it seemed to seep into the very air around him. "Do as you will," he murmured, his voice flat, devoid of hope. Phaethon took a seat beside him, letting silence settle between them, knowing that sometimes words were not what a soul needed. He allowed his light to flow out, a gentle warmth that wrapped around the man, offering him a quiet strength. After a long pause, the man spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "I am Ixion," he said, his gaze fixed on the water. "Once I was blessed by the gods, given a place among them. But in my arrogance, I betrayed their trust. I took what was not mine, and I was condemned to an eternity of torment, a wheel that would never stop turning." Phaethon felt a pang of sorrow for the man's suffering, his heart moved by the despair in Ixion's voice. He knew the pain of betrayal, the burden of pride, the weight of regret that could haunt a soul long after death. "I too have known pride," Phaethon said gently. "I reached for the light of my father, thinking it would make me whole. But I was blinded by my own ambition. It was only after I fell that I learned the true nature of light, that it is not something to possess, but something to share." Ixion looked at him, his expression softening, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "And do you believe that even those of us who have fallen so far can find peace?" Phaethon nodded, his gaze steady, filled with compassion. "I believe that peace is not something we find, but something we create. It is a light that we carry within us, a gift we give to others, even in the darkest places. For the first time, Ixion's face softened, a faint glimmer of hope in his eyes, a fragile light that seemed to reach deep into his soul, touching the wounds he had carried for eternity. He closed his eyes, taking a slow, deep breath, letting Phaethon's words settle into his heart. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice filled with gratitude. "For the first time, I feel that there may be a way forward." Phaethon smiled, his own heart lifted by Ixion's acceptance, his willingness to embrace the light. "You are not alone, Ixion. In this place, we are all bound by our shared struggles, our shared hopes, and together we can find a path forward, even in the shadows." Ixion rose, his form a little brighter, a little more whole as he walked away, his steps lightened by the hope he carried. Phaethon watched him go, his heart filled with a quiet joy, a sense of purpose that grew stronger with each soul he comforted. As Phaethon continued his journey, he realized that his own soul had grown, his own light deepening with each act of compassion, each moment of kindness. He was no longer the boy who had fallen, the boy who had reached for power he could not hold. He was now a light in the shadows, a guide for those who wandered in darkness, a soul who had found peace, not in possession, but in giving. And in the heart of the underworld, in the realm of shadows, Phaethon's light continued to shine, a reminder that even the brightest light could emerge from the darkest depths, a testament to the power of humility, compassion, and love. For he had become the eternal flame, a light that would never fade, a beacon for all who sought peace in the shadows. Phaethon had come to understand that the underworld was a place of reflection, a realm where the echoes of life lingered like shadows cast upon water. Yet, even in the depths, there were corners filled with beauty, a grove of pomegranate trees, the pale flowers of asphodel, and, running quietly through it all, the rivulet, where souls came to release their burdens, to let go of the memories that bound them to sorrow. One day, as Phaethon walked near the river, he saw a woman standing at the water's edge, her gaze fixed on the dark, still surface. Her face was lined with grief, her expression haunted by memories that clung to her, weighing her down, keeping her from moving forward. Her hands trembled as she dipped them into the river, but each time she pulled them back, unable to take the final step. Phaethon approached her slowly, sensing the depth of her struggle, the pain that held her captive. He knew that releasing one's memories was not easy, that it took courage to let go of the past, to embrace the unknown that lay beyond. "Hello, friend," he said softly, his voice a gentle warmth in the cool silence of the riverbank. "I am Phaethon, a guide in this realm. May I sit with you?" The woman looked at him, her eyes filled with sorrow and longing, a glimmer of desperation mingling with her grief. "I am Eurydice. she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. Once I was loved so deeply that I lost him. I lost him. I lost him. And I cannot let go. Phaethon felt a pang of empathy, his heart aching for the sorrow in her voice. He knew the pain of loss, the yearning for what could no longer be, the weight of a love that felt unfinished. Tell me about him, Phaethon said gently. Sometimes, sharing our memories can help us find peace, even if only for a moment. Eurydice looked away, her gaze resting on the water, her voice filled with a quiet reverence. He was Orpheus, the poet, the musician. His music was like a balm for the soul, a song that could heal any wound, mend any sorrow. He loved me with a love so pure, so true, and I loved him just as deeply. Her voice trembled, her hands clasping tightly as though trying to hold on to the memories, to keep them from slipping away. We were separated by death, she continued, her voice filled with a sorrow that seemed to echo through the very air. But he came for me, defied the gods to bring me back. We walked together, so close, so close, so close, so close, so close to the light. But he looked back, and I was lost to him forever. Phaethon placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, his touch warm and grounding. That love is a gift, Eurydice, he said softly. Even in sorrow, even in loss, that love lives on. But sometimes, to carry it forward, we must release the pain, let go of the memories that hold us in darkness. Eurydice looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear, her heart caught between the desire to remember and the need to move forward. Do you think he has forgotten me? She asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Do you think that if I let go, I will lose him forever? Phaethon shook his head, his gaze steady and filled with compassion. Love, true love, does not fade with memory. It lives within us in the very essence of who we are. Orpheus's love for you and yours for him, that love is eternal, boundless. Letting go of the memories does not mean losing the love. It means carrying it forward in a way that honors both him and a way that honors both him, yourself. Eurydice took a slow, deep breath, her gaze softening as she looked out over the river, her hands relaxing as though she had finally found the strength to release what she had held so tightly. Thank you, she murmured, her voice filled with gratitude. Thank you for reminding me of that truth. With a final glance at Phaethon, she knelt by the riverbank, her hands dipping into the cool, dark waters. As she did, a soft glow surrounded her, a light that seemed to lift the shadows from her face, leaving only peace, only love. Phaethon watched as she rose, her form a little brighter, a little more whole. As she walked away, her steps lightened by the release she had found. He felt a quiet joy fill his heart, a sense of purpose that grew stronger with each soul. He helped to find peace. Over the next days, Phaethon continued to guide souls along the river, helping them release memories that had kept them bound to sorrow, that had prevented them from moving forward. Each one carried their own story, their own pain, and to each he offered the gentle light of understanding, the warmth of companionship. One evening, as he walked along the riverbank, he felt a presence beside him, a familiar warmth, a quiet strength that filled him with a deep sense of peace. Turning, he saw Persephone, her eyes filled with pride and compassion as she regarded him. "You have come far, Phaethon," she said softly, her voice filled with admiration. "You have become a true guide, a light in the shadows for those who wander here." Phaethon bowed his head, humbled by her words, his heart filled with gratitude for the journey he had undertaken. "It is because of your guidance, my queen," he replied, his voice reverent. "You helped me see the light within myself, even when I was lost." Persephone smiled, her gaze warm and knowing. "The light was always within you, Phaethon. I merely helped you uncover it, and now you are ready for the final steps of your journey." Phaethon looked at her, his heart filled with both anticipation and humility. "What must I do?" Persephone's gaze grew thoughtful, her expression solemn. "There is one more task that remains, one final gift you must give. In the days to come, souls will come to you, each carrying their own burdens, their own sorrows. You must help them find peace, not by releasing their memories, but by helping them transform them, to see the love and light that remain." Phaethon nodded, understanding the depth of her words, the final challenge that lay before him. He would guide these souls, help them transform their memories into something beautiful, something that would allow them to carry love, even in the shadows. As Persephone's form faded into the darkness, Phaethon stood by the river, his heart filled with resolve. He would become a true guide, a light in the shadows, and in doing so, he would complete the journey he had begun, a journey not of pride, but of compassion, of humility, of love. And so he waited, his light a gentle beacon by the river of memories, ready to guide those who sought peace in the depths of the underworld. Phaethon stood by the river Lethe, his gaze resting on the dark, glistening waters. Over time, he had come to understand the delicate art of guiding souls to release their memories, to let go of the burdens that bound them. But Persephone's final task had asked more of him, to help these souls transform their memories, to carry them not as weights of sorrow, but as threads of light woven into the very fabric of their beings. It was a profound shift, a journey that required patience, compassion, and an understanding of the delicate balance between remembering and releasing. Phaethon breathed in the stillness around him, allowing his inner light to guide him, steady and unwavering. One afternoon, a figure emerged from the shadows, her face soft but marked by an unmistakable grief. Her eyes, downcast and troubled, held the sorrow of lifetimes. She approached the river's edge, kneeling beside it, as though seeking to immerse herself in its waters and let them wash her away. Phaethon stepped forward, his presence gentle and warm, his voice soft as a breeze. "Hello, friend. I am Phaethon. a guide in this realm? May I sit with you?" The woman looked up, her expression a mixture of surprise and relief. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I am Callisto. I carry a memory that refuses to leave me." Phaethon sat beside her, his gaze filled with compassion. "Memories can be both gifts and burdens," he said gently. "Tell me of yours, if you wish. Perhaps together we can find a way to transform it." Callisto took a slow, deep breath, her eyes filling with tears as she spoke. "Once I was a companion of Artemis, the goddess of the hunt. I lived freely, untouched by sorrow, until I was betrayed, cast out, left alone to bear the shame and pain of my past. Even now, that memory haunts me, binds me. It is a weight I cannot release." Phaethon reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, a quiet strength flowing from him. "The past may leave scars," he said softly, "but scars are not signs of weakness. They are reminders of resilience, of the strength it took to endure." Callisto looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and hope. "But how do I carry such a memory? How do I bear the weight of a past that feels like a wound?" "By seeing it not as a burden, but as a gift," Phaethon replied. "The strength that allowed you to survive is part of you. The love and loyalty you held for Artemis, the courage to face your sorrow, all of these are lights that remain even in the shadows. Together we can transform your memory into something beautiful, something that honors the love you carried." Slowly, as Phaethon spoke, Callisto's expression softened. She placed a hand over her heart, as though feeling a warmth she had forgotten, a strength that had always been within her. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "For the first time, I feel that my past does not define me. It is part of me, but it does not control me." Phaethon smiled, a quiet joy filling his heart as he watched her rise. Her form brighter, more whole, as she walked away, her steps lightened by the newfound strength she carried. He knew that this was the true gift of transformation, the ability to see beauty even in sorrow, to carry memories not as weights, but as lights that illuminated the path forward. Over the following days, Phaethon continued to help souls find this gift within themselves. Each encounter deepened his understanding, teaching him that memories, even painful ones, could become sources of wisdom, resilience, and love. He felt his own light grow, expanding with each soul he guided, a quiet, steady flame that illuminated the darkest corners of the underworld. One evening, as he wandered by the river, he saw a familiar figure waiting for him, Persephone, her gaze warm and knowing, her presence a gentle reassurance. "You have done well, Phaethon," she said, her voice filled with pride. "You have learned to transform sorrow into beauty, to bring light to those who dwell in darkness. But your journey is not yet complete." Phaethon nodded, sensing truth in her words. "What must I do?" Persephone's gaze grew thoughtful, her expression solemn. There are souls who are beyond transformation, who dwell in the deepest shadows, burdened by a sorrow so profound that they cannot see the light. Your task, Phaethon, is to bring them hope, to help them remember the love and light that once filled their hearts. Phaethon felt a surge of purpose, a resolve that burned bright within him. He understood now that his role was not just to guide, but to inspire, to help even the most lost souls remember the beauty that lay within them. With a final nod, Persephone's form faded into the darkness, leaving Phaethon alone with the quiet glow of his inner light, ready to bring hope to those who had forgotten what it was to be whole. And so, he began the next phase of his journey, a journey that would take him deeper into the shadows, a journey that would bring him closer to his final transformation. Phaethon ventured deeper into the underworld than he had ever gone before, following paths shrouded in a silence so profound it seemed to swallow all sound. The air grew heavier, the darkness thicker, and even his steady, quiet light seemed muted, as though the shadows resisted its gentle glow. Here, the weight of sorrow lay upon the land like a mist, clinging to everything it touched, pressing down on the spirits that lingered there. He knew this was the place Persephone had spoken of, the realm of lost souls, where despair ran so deep it seemed beyond reach, yet he felt no fear. His father's light still warmed him from within, his heart steady with the resolve he had nurtured through every soul he had guided. He was ready to face this challenge, to bring hope even to those who had forgotten the taste of joy. As he walked through the mist, he caught sight of a figure standing alone, shrouded in darkness. Her head was bowed, her shoulders slumped, her form nearly fading into the shadows. Phaethon approached her slowly, sensing the depth of her sorrow, the silence that had consumed her soul. "Hello, friend," he said softly, his voice like a gentle ripple in the quiet air. "I am Phaethon. May I sit with you?" The woman looked up, her face pale and drawn, her eyes empty and hollow. She regarded him with a mixture of weariness and disbelief, as though hope itself were a foreign concept. "Sit if you wish," she murmured, her voice thin, barely more than a whisper, "but I am beyond light." Phaethon felt his heart ache at her words, the despair in her voice resonating with a depth of sorrow that struck him to his core. He knelt beside her, his hand reaching out, offering a warmth that defied the cold shadows surrounding them. "No soul is beyond light," he said gently, his voice steady and calm. "Even here, in the depths of shadow, there is hope. Tell me of your sorrow, if you wish. Sometimes sharing our pain can help it feel a little lighter." The woman looked at him, her eyes filling with tears, her expression a mixture of anguish and vulnerability. "I am Antigone," she whispered. "Once I stood for justice, for love, for my family, but my choices led only to ruin. I lost everyone I loved. My life became a tale of tragedy, my heart a wasteland of grief. Phaethon placed a hand over his heart, feeling the depth of her sorrow settle within him, his own compassion reaching out to her like a quiet, steady flame. "I too have known loss," he replied softly. "I too have fallen, blinded by my own desires, my own ambition, but I have learned that our past, our pain, does not define us. It is a part of us, but it does not bind us." Antigone looked away, her gaze distant, as though lost in memories she could not escape. "I cannot see beyond the shadows," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I cannot find the light you speak of. It is too far from me, too distant." Phaethon leaned closer, his voice filled with a quiet, unwavering strength. "The light is not distant, Antigone. It lives within you, hidden beneath the sorrow, waiting to be kindled. It is the love you held for your family, the courage that drove you to seek justice, the strength that allowed you to endure. That light is still there, even if you cannot see it." A tear slipped down her cheek, her shoulders relaxing as though a weight had lifted, if only slightly. She closed her eyes, breathing in the warmth of his words, allowing herself to feel the faint, fragile glimmer of hope that began to take root within her heart. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. "For the first time, I feel that I am not alone." Phaethon smiled, a quiet joy filling him as he watched her form brighten, a soft glow emanating from her heart as the light within her began to awaken. He knew that this was the gift of compassion, a flame that could illuminate even the darkest corners of the soul. As Antigone rose, her steps lighter, her spirit more whole, Phaethon felt a sense of purpose that went beyond words, a purpose that reached into the very core of his being. He had become a guide not only for others, but for himself, a reminder that light could exist even in the deepest shadows, that hope was never truly lost. Over the following days, Phaethon continued his journey through the depths, meeting souls whose sorrow was etched into the very essence of their being. Some were warriors, lost to the weight of battles they had fought, haunted by the lives they had taken. Others were lovers, their hearts bound by the memory of those they had lost, their spirits trapped in a cycle of longing and grief. To each, Phaethon offered his light, his compassion, his presence. He sat with them in silence, his hand a steady warmth on their shoulder, his words a quiet balm that soothed the raw edges of their sorrow. He spoke of love, of resilience, of the strength it took to carry one's burdens with grace. One day, as he sat beside a warrior whose eyes were filled with the horrors of war, the man looked at him, his gaze weary and broken. "How do you carry such light?" he asked, his voice tinged with both envy and awe. "How do you hold on to hope, even in this place of shadow?" Phaethon smiled, his heart filled with the wisdom he had gained through his journey. "I have learned that light is not something we find," he replied softly. "It is something we create, something we carry within ourselves, a gift we give to others. Each act of kindness, each moment of compassion, these are the flames that kindle our hope. even in the darkest places. The warrior looked away, his expression thoughtful, as though pondering Phaethon's words, allowing them to reach the depths of his soul. Slowly, he nodded, his shoulders relaxing, his gaze softening. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice filled with a quiet reverence. "For the first time, I feel that perhaps there is a way forward." Phaethon watched as the warrior rose, his form brighter, his spirit lifted by the hope he had found. He knew that this was the true gift of light, the ability to inspire others, to bring warmth and comfort to those who had lost their way. And as he continued his journey, Phaethon felt his own soul grow, his own light deepening with each soul he guided. He had become more than a guide. He had become a beacon, a source of healing, of transformation. In the heart of the underworld, in the depths of sorrow, Phaethon's light continued to shine, a reminder that even the brightest flame could emerge from the darkest shadows, a testament to the power of love, compassion, and resilience. He was no longer the boy who had reached for the sun and fallen. He was a light in the darkness, a guide for those who sought peace, a soul who had found his place not in power, but in kindness, in humility, in love. And in that quiet, gentle light, Phaethon had found his purpose, a purpose that would carry him through the final steps of his journey, a journey that would lead him to a transformation beyond anything he had ever imagined. The underworld had changed around Phaethon. What once had been a realm of silent shadows and endless sorrow now felt alive, imbued with a quiet hope that glowed like embers in the dark. His presence, a gentle light in the depths, had touched countless souls, bringing them peace, guiding them toward healing. Yet he sensed that his journey was nearing its end, that there was a final lesson he had yet to learn. He was walking through the valley of Asphodel, where the pale, ghostly flowers swayed in the still air. Their faint glow reflected the soft light he carried within himself, a light that had become as much a part of him as his very soul. And as he walked, he encountered a man kneeling among the flowers, his head bowed, his hands resting in his lap as though waiting for something beyond words. Phaethon approached him, sensing a calm in this figure, a peaceful acceptance that he had not encountered before. "Hello, friend," Phaethon said softly, his voice filled with warmth. "I am Phaethon, a guide in this realm. May I sit with you?" The man looked up, his face lined with the marks of time, his eyes filled with a quiet wisdom. He smiled gently, nodding. "Please join me," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I am Cadmus, once a king, now a soul who has come to understand that even the greatest burdens can be transformed." Phaethon felt a flicker of recognition at the name. Cadmus, the founder of Thebes, a figure from the mortal world who had faced countless trials, who had borne losses that few could understand. "What brings you here, Cadmus?" Phaethon asked, his voice filled with respect. "What burdens have you carried?" Cadmus's gaze rested on the flowers, his expression thoughtful. I have known both triumph and sorrow. I built a city, faced great beasts, lost those I loved, and through it all I learned that life is a cycle, that each loss carries a lesson, each burden a gift. Phaethon nodded, understanding the wisdom in his words. And what lesson have you found here, in this place of shadows? Cadmus looked at him, his gaze filled with a quiet strength. I have learned that forgiveness begins within, that peace is something we create, a seed we plant in the soil of our own souls. We carry it with us as a gift to ourselves and to those we meet. Phaethon felt the truth of Cadmus's words resonate within him, a warmth that spread through his heart, filling him with a sense of purpose. He realized that his role was not just to bring peace to others, but to help them plant the seeds of that peace within themselves, to help them carry hope forward, even in the darkest places. You are wise, Cadmus, Phaethon said, his voice filled with admiration. I have spent my journey offering light to others, but I see now that they must carry that light within themselves, that I must help them find their own seeds of redemption. Cadmus smiled, his gaze filled with pride. You have come far, Phaethon. You have learned the true nature of compassion, the power of humility. And now you are ready to sow these seeds in the hearts of others, to become a guide not only for them, but for yourself. With a gentle nod, Cadmus rose, his form glowing with a soft, peaceful light. Thank you, Phaethon. May your light continue to grow, to illuminate the paths of all who wander here. As Cadmus's form faded into the mist, Phaethon felt a quiet joy fill his heart. He knew now that his journey had prepared him for this task, that he was ready to help souls plant the seeds of redemption within themselves, to let hope take root and blossom, even in the shadows. In the days that followed, Phaethon began this new chapter of his journey. When he encountered souls burdened by sorrow, he guided them to the valley of Asphodel, teaching them to see their pasts as sources of strength, to plant the seeds of forgiveness and hope within their own hearts. One evening, he encountered a young man standing alone by the riverbank, his face etched with guilt, his shoulders weighed down by an invisible burden. Phaethon approached him, sensing the depth of the young man's sorrow, the regret that had bound him in silence. "Hello, friend," Phaethon said gently, his voice a soft warmth in the cool air. "I am Phaethon, a guide in this realm. May I sit with you?" The young man looked at him, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and shame. "I am Aegisthus," he murmured, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Once I was consumed by hatred, by anger. I took a life driven by a need for revenge, and now I am trapped by the weight of that act." Phaethon placed a hand on his shoulder, offering a quiet strength. "We are not defined by our past, Aegisthus. We are defined by what we choose to carry forward, by the lessons we learn, the compassion we find within ourselves." Aegisthus looked at him, his gaze filled with a glimmer of hope, a fragile light that seemed to take root within his heart. "Do you believe that even I can find peace?" he asked, his voice trembling. Phaethon nodded, his gaze steady. Yes, I believe that peace is a seed we plant within ourselves. It may take time to grow, but with patience, with kindness, it can blossom, even in the darkest places. Slowly, Aegisthus knelt by the riverbank, his hands resting on the earth, a sense of calm settling over him. Phaethon knelt beside him, guiding him to release his guilt, to plant the seeds of forgiveness and love within his own heart. As they rose, Aegisthus' form seemed brighter, his spirit lighter, as though he had found a new path, a way forward that did not bind him to his past. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice filled with gratitude. "For the first time, I feel that I can be more than my mistakes." Phaethon smiled, his own heart lifted by the peace he had helped Aegisthus find. He knew now that this was his role, not just to offer light, but to help others kindle their own, to plant the seeds of redemption that would carry them forward. In the days that followed, Phaethon continued to guide souls to the valley of Asphodel, helping them plant seeds of hope, of love, of peace. He watched as the souls found their own paths, as their lights grew brighter, each one carrying a part of him, a part of the journey he had undertaken. And as he walked through the underworld, his own light grew, a quiet, steady flame that illuminated the path before him, a reminder that even in the darkest places, there was always the potential for growth, for transformation. He was no longer the boy who had sought his father's light, the boy who had reached for the sun and fallen. He was a guide, a bearer of hope, a soul who had found his place not in power, but in kindness, in humility, in the quiet beauty of helping others find their own light. And in that purpose, Phaethon had found himself, a self that was more than ambition, more than pride, a self that was woven from compassion, from resilience, from love. As he walked, he felt the presence of his father's light within him, a warmth that filled him with a sense of peace, of unity. He knew now that he was not alone, that he was part of something greater, a light that could never fade, a gift that would live on in the hearts of those he had touched. And so he continued his journey, planting seeds of redemption, bringing hope to the darkest corners of the underworld, a light that would shine for all eternity. The underworld was quieter than Phaethon had ever known it to be, its shadows softened by the countless lights he had kindled in the hearts of others. Every soul he had guided, every glimmer of hope he had helped plant, had become a part of the realm's landscape. A silent yet profound shift, an invisible web of connection that had brought a gentle warmth to even the darkest corners of Hades. As Phaethon walked along the familiar paths, he felt the air change around him. There was a stillness, a deep calm, as though the underworld itself were holding its breath. He sensed the weight of his journey, a feeling of completion that lingered in his heart, filling him with a peace that went beyond words. But he also felt a new presence, a weight he hadn't sensed before, growing heavier with each step. His memories, which he had set aside to guide others, began to resurface, unbidden and vivid, each one carrying a piece of his past, of the life he had lived, the choices he had made, the regrets that had shaped his journey. It started with a single image, the blazing sun chariot, the thrill of holding the reins in his hands, the fierce ambition that had driven him to prove himself. He felt the rush of pride, the desire that had blinded him to the risks, to the wisdom of his father's warnings. And then he saw the world below. Burning fields, dried rivers, villages consumed in fire. The cries of mortals echoed in his ears, a cacophony of pain and suffering that struck him with a force so sharp it felt as though it were tearing through his very soul. He stopped, his breath caught in his throat, his heart pounding as the memories flooded over him. He remembered the moment he lost control, the wild, unyielding strength of the horses, the panic that had seized him as the chariot veered off course, and finally the sight of Zeus's thunderbolt hurtling toward him like a judgment from the heavens, a final act that had cast him down from the sky. The pain was raw, fresh, as though he were living it all over again. His pride, his recklessness, the harm he had caused, all of it returned to him, a weight that pressed down upon his heart, filling him with a sorrow he hadn't known he still carried. Phaethon sank to his knees, his hands trembling, his head bowed. He had guided countless souls through their own memories, helped them find peace, transform their pasts into sources of strength. But now, in the face of his own regrets, he felt vulnerable, exposed, as though the light he had carried within him was slipping away, fading beneath the weight of his mistakes. "Father," he whispered, his voice barely more than a breath, "I tried to honor you. I tried to become more than I was, but I failed." The silence around him was profound, a vast emptiness that seemed to swallow his words, and for a moment he felt truly alone, as though the journey he had taken, the souls he had helped, had all been for nothing, a futile attempt to escape the truth of his own past. But then, in the quiet, a warmth began to stir within him, a gentle, familiar light that grew brighter with each passing moment. He recognized it, the warmth of his father's presence, a presence that had never truly left him, even in his darkest moments. "Phaethon," a voice spoke, calm and steady, echoing from within him, filling the emptiness with a warmth that reached deep into his soul. "You have not failed. You have learned. You have grown." Phaethon felt tears slip down his cheeks, his heart aching with both sorrow and gratitude. He realized that his journey had never been about perfection, about erasing his mistakes. It had been about acceptance, about embracing his past, his flaws, his humanity, and transforming them into something beautiful, something that could serve others. The memories that had haunted him softened, their edges blurring as they became a part of him, woven into the fabric of his being. He saw his pride not as a burden, but as a lesson in humility. His fall not as a punishment, but as a path to growth, to understanding. He rose slowly, his heart filled with a quiet strength, a peace that went beyond words. He knew now that his journey was complete, that he had found his place, not in the light of the heavens, but in the depths of the underworld, a guide, a friend, a light for those who wandered in darkness. As he took a final step forward, he felt the air shift around him, the shadows parting as a new presence approached. He looked up, and there, standing before him, was Persephone, her eyes filled with pride, her gaze warm and knowing. "You have completed your journey, Phaethon," she said, her voice filled with reverence. "You have become a true light in this realm, a guide for those who seek peace. And now you are ready for your final transformation." Phaethon nodded, his heart filled with gratitude, with love. He had found peace, acceptance, and in that acceptance he had found himself, a self that was more than pride, more than ambition, a self woven from compassion, from humility, from love. Persephone reached out, placing a hand over his heart, a gentle warmth filling him, radiating through every part of his being. And in that warmth, he felt a light that grew brighter, expanding beyond his form, illuminating the world around him. With a final quiet breath, Phaethon closed his eyes, letting himself dissolve into that light, a light that would shine forever in the depths of the underworld, a beacon of hope, of redemption, a gift for all who sought peace. And in that light, Phaethon's spirit became eternal, a flame that would never fade, a reminder that even the brightest light could emerge from the darkest shadows, a testament to the power of love, of compassion, of forgiveness. Phaethon, the boy who had once reached for the sun, had found his place, not in the heavens, but in the hearts of those he had touched, a light that would shine for all eternity. As Phaethon's spirit embraced the light within him, he felt his being shift, expanding, softening, until he was no longer bound to a single form. The light that had once been contained within his heart now radiated outward, filling the entire space around him. His soul had become an ember of warmth, a spark that touched everything it reached, casting a gentle glow that softened the shadows of the underworld. Persephone watched, her eyes filled with reverence and pride, her gaze holding both sadness and joy as she witnessed Phaethon's final transformation. His journey had led him here, not to a destination of glory, but to a place of quiet purpose, a place where he could offer guidance to others, a place where his light would continue to shine. Slowly, she stepped forward, her voice soft but filled with a strength that resonated through the realm. "Phaethon, you have given this realm a gift that no other has," she said, her voice carrying the weight of all he had accomplished. "You have brought light to those who were lost, hope to those who had forgotten it, and peace to those who could not find it within themselves. Your journey has become their journey, your light their beacon. Phaethon's essence, now diffused into the warm, glowing light that surrounded him, pulsed with gratitude, with love. He was no longer a mortal boy reaching for the sun. He was something eternal, something woven from the essence of compassion, of resilience, of humility. He sensed the presence of the souls he had helped, the warrior, the poet, the lover, the wanderer. Each one felt his warmth, his light as it enveloped them, offering a reminder of the peace they had found, the forgiveness they had embraced. His light touched each soul with a quiet, steady strength, a presence that was both comforting and transformative. Around him, the underworld itself seemed to brighten, the shadows softening as the souls felt the warmth of his presence, a warmth that would remain long after he had become part of the realm. His light was no longer bound to him alone. It had become a gift for all, a flame that would burn forever in the hearts of those who sought redemption, a guide for all who wandered in darkness. With a gentle final breath, Phaethon allowed himself to merge fully with that light, surrendering to its warmth, letting his spirit become one with the very essence of peace he had come to understand. His journey had been one of transformation, of letting go, of becoming more than he had ever imagined. And in that letting go, he had found a purpose that would carry on forever. Persephone closed her eyes, feeling his presence settle into the fabric of the underworld, his light a quiet, eternal flame that would guide all who sought peace. She knew that his journey had come full circle, that he had become what he was always meant to be, a light in the darkness, a flame that would shine for all eternity. As the years passed, mortals who entered the underworld would speak of the gentle warmth that greeted them, a light that seemed to soften the shadows, to ease the burdens they carried. Souls who had once been lost found themselves drawn to that light, their hearts lifted by a presence that brought them a sense of peace, of acceptance. The tales of Phaethon, the boy who had reached for the sun and fallen, transformed into a new legend, the story of Phaethon, the eternal flame, a spirit who had found his place in the heart of the underworld, a guide for all who sought hope in the shadows. His presence became a beacon, a reminder that even in the darkest realms, light could be found, that love, compassion, and forgiveness were stronger than any sorrow, any regret. And in the land of the living, those who spoke of Phaethon's tale found solace in his story, a reminder that redemption was always within reach, that even the greatest falls could lead to transformation, to purpose, to peace. His journey became a testament to the power of humility, of compassion, of a love that transcended pride, that illuminated even the darkest places. Phaethon had become an eternal part of the underworld, a presence that would shine forever, guiding those who needed it, offering hope to those who sought it, a light that would never fade. For in his journey, Phaethon had found his true self, a self not bound to ambition or pride, but to love, to kindness, to the gentle, unwavering flame that now burned eternally in the heart of the underworld. The eternal flame. The end.